"Help me, my mom is dying," begged the little girl to the cold CEO. A little girl of only 4 years old stood before the most feared CEO in the city and pleaded, "Please don't let my mommy die." Lily Carter had no idea that those words would pierce through Ethan Blackwood's cold exterior and set something much greater in motion. What began as a desperate plea would become the chance not only to save her mother's life, but also to forever change her own, the life of the most powerful man in New York, and the lives of hundreds of others who would never be the same after that encounter. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The mirrored elevator glided up to the top floor of Madison Avenue, and when the doors slid open, the sound of footsteps broke the rhythm of the polished, formal world inside. Lily Carter, only 4 years old, stepped onto the carpeted hallway, as if she were carrying a message that couldn't wait. Her blue dress was wrinkled, her pink shoes worn at the tips, and her blonde curls were held back with a stretched-out hair tie. Yet something in her posture drew attention. Her chin lifted, her gaze steady, and the faded backpack pressed tightly against her chest as if it were a shield. The security guard, used to ushering in late executives, froze in confusion at the sight, while the receptionist, juggling folders and ID badges, had no idea what protocol to follow. Unfazed, Lily declared with clarity, "I want to talk to the most important man in this building." No handbook said what to do when a child demanded to see the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. The message traveled quickly, like an electric current, until it reached the desk of Ethan Blackwood, 35, one of the most feared names in real estate. Sitting in his office of glass and dark wood, with a sweeping view of the East River, he was reviewing financial reports while on the phone with foreign investors. His secretary, Claire Hudson, her voice unsteady, informed him that a little girl was insisting on coming up. Ethan raised his eyes from the paperwork, incredulous. He was about to end the call when he asked, sharply, what kind of interruption this was. Claire drew in a breath before repeating, "It's a child, sir. She says she needs to speak with you." For a moment, silence filled the room. The man who never allowed deviations from his schedule leaned back, sighed, and gave in to a sudden, disarming curiosity. "Send her up." 5 minutes later, the heavy door opened. Lily stood at the threshold, intimidated by the grandeur of the room. Modern paintings on the walls, rosewood furniture, and natural light flooding every corner. For a second, she hesitated. But recalling her mother's words, she drew in a deep breath, straightened her small shoulders, and walked toward the desk. Intrigued, Ethan removed his glasses and studied her as she approached. The girl did not look away. Her intense blue eyes locked with his, filled with a courage that startled him. "Are you the most important man here?" she asked firmly. He hesitated, momentarily thrown off, before replying, "I suppose I am. And who are you?" Hugging her backpack tightly, Lily introduced herself matter-of-factly as Lily Carter, daughter of Sophia, a cleaning lady. She said her mother was in the hospital and would die without medicine. The words fell heavy, pulling from Ethan the first true silence of his day. He leaned forward to her level, trying to understand. He asked who told her this, and Lily answered that Aunt Martha had said only a very rich man could help. She added that she had learned to ride the bus by herself because her mother had taught her the number of the line in case she ever got lost. With every word, Ethan realized this was not a childish whim, but a desperate plea. He pressed the intercom and asked Claire to bring water and food for the girl. Lily accepted the cup with both hands, whispered a thank you, and began to drink. When the sandwich arrived, she ate slowly, trying to appear polite, though her hunger betrayed her. The contrast was striking. The man used to closing million-dollar deals watched a little girl fighting to hide her need. He couldn't take his eyes off her, something unfamiliar growing inside him. When Lily finished eating, she wiped her mouth with the napkin and looked back at him. "You're going to help my mommy, aren't you?" she asked without hesitation. Ethan, who had so often brushed off journalists and shareholders with icy replies, found himself unable to evade her insistence. He picked up the phone, called his right-hand man, Daniel Price, and gave a firm order to head immediately to Hopewell General Hospital, find Sophia Carter, and authorize all treatment costs. "No limits, Daniel. Top priority." On the other end, his assistant answered in shock. Lily's eyes widened. "So you're really going to help?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his voice solemn. "Yes, Lily. Your mother is not alone." For the first time in years, he felt his words weigh more than any contract he had ever signed. Before leaving, Lily unzipped her backpack and pulled out a worn piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, faded crayon lines showing two figures holding hands, a dark-haired woman and a little girl in a blue dress. She carefully handed it to Ethan as though offering a treasure. "That's me and Mommy. Next time, you can be in it too, because you're going to help her." He took the drawing, and a knot formed in his throat. He placed it in his leather case, tucked alongside his most valuable contracts. In that simple gesture, he realized that, to Lily, he was already part of her family. As he watched her leave escorted by the driver, clutching her backpack, Ethan remained alone in his panoramic office. Yet nothing looked the same. The glimmer of the East River, the modern art on the walls, the spreadsheets on his screen all seemed insignificant next to the courage of a child who dared to ask, "Please, help my mommy." Ethan's car stopped in front of Hopewell General Hospital, and he stepped out with firm strides, carrying only the restrained urgency he rarely allowed to show. The lobby, lit by harsh white lights, smelled strongly of disinfectant, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the halls. Nurses guided him to a small room at the end of a narrow corridor, where Sophia Carter lay alone, connected to machines that tracked every heartbeat. She looked fragile, almost lost between the worn sheets and flattened pillows. When she opened her eyes and recognized him, surprise made her try to sit up, but she didn't have the strength. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, as if asking for help was some kind of failure. Ethan moved closer and pulled up a chair, setting aside the distant executive persona. He assured her she had nothing to apologize for, that it was the company's fault for not noticing her exhaustion. His tone carried the firmness of someone used to giving orders, that there was something more human in it, something closer than Sophia had expected. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Her tearful eyes betrayed the mix of gratitude and shame. She felt. Ethan remained seated, focused, never looking away, absorbing every detail of the modest room that clashed so starkly with the grandeur of his offices. The steady beeping of the machines was a cruel reminder that her life depended on more than medicine. It depended on the chance to be seen. Before leaving, he requested full medical reports and made it clear that no resource was to be withheld. The nurse, surprised by the authority in his voice, simply nodded before hurrying off to carry out his order. Ethan lingered for several minutes in silence, watching Sophia drift back to sleep, and when he finally rose to leave, it felt as though he had left a part of himself behind in that room. The hospital elevator doors closed behind him, but the image of such a fragile woman never once left his mind. When he returned later that night, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Sophia was awake, and beside her, sitting in a low chair, was Lily, holding her mother's hand tightly. Martha, the elderly neighbor, clutched her bag in her lap, weary but present. Ethan's driver had followed his instructions, making sure. The little girl was brought safely to the hospital after school. As soon as he entered, Lily lifted her face and smiled, as if his arrival was proof that everything would be all right. The plain hospital room seemed brighter with the child there. bringing color and hope to a place otherwise ruled by machines. Sophia, still weak, couldn't hide the emotion of seeing her daughter beside a man she had never expected to step into her life. Lily quickly got up and walked over to Ethan, pulling on his hand with the ease of someone who had already decided to trust him. "You came back," she said firmly, as if stating a fact. He followed her to the bed, kneeling to meet her at eye level. Sophia watched in silence, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. With a serious expression, the little girl asked if he was really going to keep helping or if he would disappear later. The innocent yet fearful words hit Ethan in a way he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just a child asking for attention. It was someone who had already learned far too young what it meant to be forgotten. He held her small hand and promised, "I won't leave. I'll be here as long as you need me, not just until your mom gets better." Sophia turned her face away, unable to contain her emotion, while Martha let out a long breath, witnessing a moment that would change everything. Lily, still clinging to his hand, rested her head against his arm, as if she had finally found the support she was looking for. That simple gesture of trust made Ethan feel weight, unlike any contract he had ever signed. Standing there, with two fragile lives leaning on each other, he realized he had given his word to someone who wouldn't accept excuses or delays. The promise he made wasn't part of any strategy, nor the product of social obligation. It was a bond that would tie him to that family in a way he could never undo. As he left again that night, the city outside seemed louder than before, but inside him there was a strange quiet, filled only with the sound of Lily's voice and the image of a mother's grateful eyes. On the seat beside him, his briefcase was stuffed with reports and million-dollar contracts. Yet none of it felt as important as the child's drawing tucked inside and the promise made in a modest hospital room. As Manhattan's lights slid past the car windows, Ethan understood he had crossed an invisible line. It wasn't just the CEO who had walked into that hospital. It was a man who, by his own choice, had taken on the responsibility of never turning away from two people who needed him. Back at the office, Ethan walked down the main corridor as he did every day, but the air around him felt different. The glass walls, the pristine furniture, and the sweeping view of the East River no longer held the same allure. The image of Sophia in the hospital, fragile and alone, and of Lily gripping his hand with unwavering trust replayed in his mind with every step. He sat in his leather chair and, without delay, called in Claire Hudson. This time, he wasn't asking for cost analyses or productivity reports. He wanted details about every employee, starting with the cleaning staff but extending across all departments. "I want names, job descriptions, working conditions, schedules, medical leave records, everything you can gather," he ordered. Claire hesitated, surprised by the unusual request, but she quickly realized this wasn't business as usual. For once, the CEO wasn't looking for numbers to impress investors, but for lives that had remained invisible behind the scenes. The first round of information arrived in stacks of folders and digital files. Ethan locked himself in his office, spending hours reading stories that almost never reached the top floors. He discovered that Sophia's case wasn't an exception. Receptionists were working night shifts in bars just to cover rent. Security guards struggled with untreated hypertension. Young assistants drowned under student debt they could never hope to repay. Each file revealed something beyond the title on the badge. People with families, illnesses, fears, and dreams ignored by the cold logic of spreadsheets. Ethan spent the night immersed in those reports, and when he closed the last folder, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine outrage. He realized that the fortune and prestige he had built rested on the backs of people working themselves to exhaustion without recognition or real support. The next morning, he called Daniel Price and a few other trusted managers into a closed-door meeting. The atmosphere was uneasy. They were used to discussing expansion strategies and acquisitions, not employee benefits. Ethan, resolute, announced immediate measures. Salaries at the lowest levels would be raised, health coverage expanded for everyone, and a corporate daycare would be established so parents could work with peace of mind. He also ordered the creation of a transportation assistance program to ensure no one had to walk long, unsafe distances after late-night shifts. The room went silent. Daniel cautiously mentioned costs and the potential impact on quarterly reports. But Ethan shut him down. "I'm not asking, I'm deciding. This starts now," he said with the same authority he used in multi-million-dollar negotiations. Only this time, there were no numbers at stake, just dignity. Days later, the main auditorium of Blackwood Enterprises hosted, for the first time, employees who had never been invited into that space. Men and women in simple uniforms, used to moving only through service corridors, sat in plush seats side by side. The air was thick with tension and doubt. Ethan entered without security or ceremony, walked to the stage, and looked directly at them. The silence was almost absolute. He began by thanking them, not with rehearsed lines, but with straightforward words. He admitted he had failed to recognize the human worth behind every role and vowed that things would change. Then, one by one, he laid out the new measures. He didn't use charts or projections. He spoke face to face, as if having a personal conversation with each of them. Many could hardly believe what they were hearing. Others covered their faces with their hands to hold back tears. The impact of that meeting rippled through the entire company. A security guard murmured that he could finally afford the treatment he needed. A receptionist called her mother, crying with joy at the news of a daycare that would finally give her younger sister proper care. A cleaning worker wiped her eyes, repeating that she never imagined the CEO would call her by name. Watching those reactions, Ethan felt something shift inside him. There were no headlines for this moment, not yet, but something far more powerful. The certainty that his decision had changed lives. As he stepped off the stage, he was met with spontaneous applause, hesitant at first, but soon filling the entire auditorium. The respect he received wasn't born of fear or ambition, but of gratitude. Back in his panoramic office, Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. The East River shimmered at dusk, but his thoughts weren't on the business horizon. He saw Lily's face clearly in his mind, the determined eyes, the worn-out backpack, the courage to walk through an entire building to ask for help. She was the one who had broken the barrier between numbers and people, the one who forced him to realize that every decision he made could shape the future of entire families. Leaning back in his chair, he took a deep breath and understood that it wasn't just his company changing, it was him. For the first time, Ethan Blackwood was acting not to impress board members or secure contracts, but because he had grasped the true value of a simple gesture that began with a child's request. And that conviction would guide everything he did from that moment on. The changes announced by Ethan spread quickly through the halls of Blackwood Enterprises, but they also reached the board of directors just as fast. It didn't take long before an emergency meeting was called. In the glass-walled room on the 32nd floor, around a long oak table, veteran directors waited with stern expressions. The atmosphere carried a sense of judgment, as if they were all expecting the CEO to justify what they saw as a dangerous deviation from course. Ethan entered unhurried, adjusted his suit jacket, and took the seat at the head of the table, showing no sign of insecurity. As soon as the meeting began, Margaret Foster, known for her rigid stance, spoke first. With a cutting tone, she questioned the rise in expenses and warned of the risk of reduced profits. Other board members murmured in agreement, emphasizing that the company couldn't be guided by sentiment. Ethan listened silently, watching each reaction with the composure of someone who had faced far tougher international negotiations. When the string of criticisms finally ended, he placed his hands on the table and began to speak. He explained that exhausted and underpaid employees don't deliver solid results, and that every resignation due to burnout costs more than any salary increase. He added that a reputation for social responsibility would not only attract contracts, but also high-level talent, something no marketing campaign could buy. His voice lacked its usual coldness, carrying instead a conviction that caught even his opponents off guard. Margaret tried to interrupt, but Ethan didn't leave room. "We're investing in people, and healthy, valued, and motivated people sustain any empire," he said. Looking straight at her dot, the numbers he presented weren't distant projections, but real data already gathered on productivity and costs. The clarity of his reasoning left some board members uncertain, though resistance remained. One of the oldest reminded him that shareholders expected generous dividends in the coming semester and that these changes might compromise that outlook. Ethan held his ground. He explained that he was already in contact with international clients who valued companies committed to social causes, and that ongoing negotiations would be strengthened by this renewed image. The discussion grew heated, voices rising, but he never backed down. The CEO, once remembered for his coldness, now stood as a man willing to go head-to-head with anyone necessary to defend his decision. After hours of debate, the board laid down an ultimatum: 6 months to prove the new investments wouldn't compromise Blackwood Enterprises' results. Otherwise, they would revisit his decision and demand immediate cuts. Ethan accepted the condition without hesitation. He didn't ask for more time, didn't plead for understanding. He simply stated, with the confidence of a man who had already made up his mind, that the results would come. The silence that followed was heavy. The board wasn't sure if the man before them was bold or reckless, but they couldn't deny the strength of his resolve. Margaret, clearly displeased, ended the meeting with a curt remark, though it was obvious she had underestimated his determination. When everyone left the room, Ethan remained alone, staring out at the city lights through the panoramic windows. He thought of the faces he had read about in the reports: receptionists, security guards, assistants, workers who now carried a renewed sense of hope. The weight of the 6-month deadline didn't intimidate him. If anything, it fueled him. He knew he would have to balance flawless reports and appealing numbers for investors, but he was ready to carry that responsibility. His thoughts drifted to Sophia, still in the hospital, and to Lily, who looked at him as someone who could not fail. Those two names reminded him that his fight wasn't for statistics, it was for real lives. Back in his office, he found an envelope waiting on his desk with new drawings from Lily, delivered by the driver. This time, instead of just figures holding hands, the pages were filled with brighter colors and more details. A house with glowing windows, a tall tree, and 3 people smiling beneath the same roof. Ethan held the paper carefully, allowing himself a rare moment of stillness. It wasn't just a child's gesture. It was a reminder that he had taken on a role far beyond any formal contract. As he slipped the drawing into his leather folder, he realized that more than facing boards and investors, his true test would be not letting down the trust of that little girl. The days following the clash with the board brought Ethan into a rhythm unlike any he had ever known. Between meetings and calls with investors, he carved out time in his schedule to visit the hospital, as though that modest room had become an extension of his own life. Sophia's recovery was slow but steady, while Martha balanced practical care with words of comfort. Lily was always there, seemingly waiting for him every evening, with colorful drawings in hand. Each page she offered carried another version of the family she imagined: her mother, herself, and inevitably him. Ethan tucked every one of those drawings into his leather folder as if they were priceless documents. Sophia, deeply moved, realized that what bound her daughter to the CEO was no longer simple gratitude. Something real and unexpected was taking shape between them. It was during one of those visits that Lily, with the unfiltered innocence of childhood, let slip a phrase that shook everyone in the room. Showing a picture of 3 people walking side by side, she smiled and said, "That's you, Daddy Ethan?" Sophia froze in surprise. Martha pressed a hand to her chest, and Ethan needed a few seconds to gather himself. He knelt in front of the little girl and gently explained that he wasn't her real father. Lily, however, held his hand tightly and replied, "But you can be my dad at heart." The certainty in her tone left no room for refusal. Ethan agreed, and she hugged him with pure joy. Sophia couldn't hold back her tears, but she understood that the title, simple as it was, brought peace to her daughter's heart and hope for the future. But life has a way of testing promises, and soon came the first challenge. On a day packed with commitments, Ethan found himself stuck in a meeting with lawyers and investors that dragged on far too long. The driver, used to following precise instructions, waited for permission to leave and ended up arriving at the school too late. When he finally pulled up, he saw Lily sitting alone on the bench near the gate, backpack on her lap, her eyes distant. All the other children had already been picked up. She got into the car quietly, without complaint, but the tears welling in her eyes revealed how much the wait had hurt her. The driver took her to Martha's house and, later, when he picked Ethan up for the hospital, he reported what had happened. "She was very sad," he said in a heavy tone. The words hit Ethan like a blow no boardroom could ever deliver. On the ride to the hospital, the silence in the car was suffocating. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the city, passing by the window, but all he could see in his mind was the little girl sitting alone, believing she had been left behind. The guilt weighed on him in a way he had never experienced. Multi-million-dollar contracts, risky mergers, failed negotiations, none of it compared to the burden of that mistake. When he entered the room, Lily was at her mother's side, her small hand clutching Sophia's as if it were an anchor. The moment she saw him, she ran toward him, but not with her usual smile. Resting her face against his chest, she whispered, "Did you forget me?" Ethan dropped to his knees immediately, cupping her face in his hands. "No, Lily, I will never forget you," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. He explained that the delay was his fault, that he should have organized himself better, and he apologized sincerely. With every word, he felt the weight of responsibility grow. Lily listened in silence, then murmured that she believed him before hugging him tightly. From her bed, Sophia watched intently, tears brimming in her eyes, while Martha, in the corner, nodded slowly, recognizing the depth of the moment. The man who once seemed untouchable was now on his knees before a child, begging for her trust. That night, Sophia asked Ethan for a serious conversation. In a faint voice, she said her daughter had already suffered too much from absence and that any slip could leave scars. Ethan didn't try to justify himself. He simply promised that he would do better, that he would never allow Lily to feel abandoned again. Martha added that promises made to children carried a unique weight because they are remembered forever. Ethan absorbed her words in silence, knowing she was right. It wasn't enough to show up now and then. He would have to prove every day that he deserved the title of Dad at Heart. In the days that followed, he reorganized his life in ways he never had before. He delegated tasks, cut unnecessary meetings, and made Lily's schedule his top priority. The driver was given strict instructions never to wait for authorization before picking her up, and meetings were interrupted whenever there was a risk of delay. At the hospital, Lily greeted him once again with the bright smile that had become so precious to him. while Sophia watched with relief as the bond grew stronger. Ethan came to understand that his world no longer revolved solely around balance, sheets, and contracts. The real challenge stood right before him: to be steady, trustworthy, and present for a little girl brave enough to believe in him. And to his own surprise, it was that very challenge that made him feel more alive than ever. Months had passed since the day Lily walked through the Madison Avenue building to ask for help, and life for everyone had changed entirely. After a long treatment, Sophia was finally discharged from the hospital, returning home with medical support and care that once seemed out of reach. Her pale face now showed signs of color, and strength was slowly returning to her body. Martha, tireless in her dedication, had become almost a grandmother to Lily, but she no longer carried the burden alone. Ethan had taken on an essential role in that routine. The little girl, once shadowed by the fear of losing her mother, was now thriving with the constant presence of the man she proudly called her Dad at heart. Small gestures revealed this new bond: him helping her fix her hair before an outing, reviewing her homework, or taking her to the park on weekends. What had begun as a desperate plea had become a daily connection, built in the details of ordinary life. Inside Blackwood Enterprises, the results of the new social policies became so clear that even the most skeptical board members had to admit their success. Absenteeism dropped sharply, productivity rose, and employee turnover fell to unprecedented lows. The transportation program reduced delays and provided safety. The corporate daycare echoed with children's laughter, and the expanded health plan cut down on sick leaves. Ethan watched it all unfold with the calm certainty of a man who knew he had made the right decision, never forgetting that it all started because a child forced him to look beyond the spreadsheets. The company gained public recognition. Contracts were strengthened, but for him, nothing compared to seeing employees in the halls greeting him not out of obligation, but with genuine gratitude. At an internal celebration event, he decided to do something symbolic. He gathered executives, employees from every department, and even family members into the main auditorium. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't walk onto the stage alone. He extended his hand to Lily and brought her with him. The girl, wearing her favorite blue dress, clutched a drawing tightly in her hands. In front of hundreds of people, Ethan thanked everyone for their commitment and, instead of closing with numbers, gave the floor to the child who had inspired him. Lily stepped up to the microphone and, without a hint of shyness, declared, "People only work well when they're truly well." The room erupted into emotional applause, with many rising to their feet, tears glistening in their eyes. Standing beside her, Ethan felt a pride that came not from financial triumphs, but from the certainty that he was helping build something greater. That evening, Sophia, stronger now, watched the scene from the back of the auditorium with tears streaming down her face. Martha clasped her hands together in quiet satisfaction, grateful to witness the impossible: a man transformed before everyone's eyes because of the courage of a child. As Ethan stepped off the stage with Lily holding his hand, employees surrounded him with congratulations, not for bold financial moves, but for the humanity of his choices. He felt different, lighter, as if he had finally found a purpose no amount of money could buy. Lily, still buzzing with excitement from the applause, whispered in his ear, "See? I told you, you could be my dad at heart." He smiled and lifted her into his arms, offering a silent answer. Life at home also began to take on a new rhythm with Sophia's steady recovery. Still under medical care, she was able to spend more time at home, closely following her daughters. Routine. Lily returned from school full of stories to share, and Sophia, with renewed patience, joined in on the conversations and games, something that had felt impossible for months. Ethan was present at every step, not replacing anyone, but taking his place as someone who chose to be there. He visited the house naturally, supported Sophia at medical appointments, helped with small tasks, and dedicated weekends to outings with the girl. His office, once filled only with reports and contracts, now displayed the colorful drawings Lily proudly brought him. Simple conversations, walks in the park, and shared meals replaced the heavy silence of his apartment, showing him a kind of joy he had never valued. One quiet afternoon, after playing in the park, Lily sat down beside Ethan and rested her head on his arm. Sleepiness softened her voice when she asked, "Will you be my dad forever?" He didn't hesitate. He assured her that yes, nothing in the world would take him away from her or her mother. From a distance, Sophia smiled, her heart full, realizing that the fear of abandonment no longer had a place in their lives. Between multi-million-dollar contracts and children's drawings, between high-level commitments and weekends spent as a family, Ethan Blackwood understood that the greatest transformation hadn't taken place in his company, but within himself. In the quiet that followed him home, he knew with absolute clarity that he had found something no fortune could ever buy: the feeling of belonging to a family. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.